Cool. We good to start, you guys? Now you tell me, do you want me to use this mic? Is that better? If I use the mic, I'm tethered to right here. That's about all I can do. Is that still good with everybody, but prefer the mic? Awesome. Okay. Let me start with, my name is Dr. Wes Robins, and I had the wildest morning, you guys. I left the house at 5:30 from Alpharetta, Marietta, Georgia kind of area, and drove here, beautiful drive, nobody on the road. And then I got here and they told me, the valet guys were like, yeah, we're totally full. We can't park you. And so they were like, go across to the Ruth Chris. There's a parking deck right by there. So I go over by there, I go in, I park, and there's this area that you go in, turn to the right, park. So I do that, I'm getting all my stuff out of the trunk, and then I turn around and they close this gate. And I'm in this area, the parking lot that you're not supposed to park in. It's totally private and I can't get my car out. So I come and I'm like, okay, let me go check in first. So I run over here, I check in, and they're like, we don't have any reservation. I'm like, my wife made it last night. And they're like, oh, it was for June 6th. And I was like, no. So they put me in a hospitality room with a pull-out bed. But I'm here and I have that. And then I went and I got my car out after 9 security guards. And then I was walking around in my room and I was like, what is that? Why does my heel feel weird on my shoe? And then I looked and my entire heel is falling apart. And I was like, this is the best, man. This is, if this isn't spirit giving a sense of humor, and just, it was beautiful. So you guys, I'm very, very grateful to be here. I'm going to start with a little bit of an intro and then we can dive in. And then, are you with us the whole time, the moderator? Awesome, so you can keep me on time a little bit. So I have until 2:15. Here's what I'm going to try and do. I'd love to run through everything and then open it up at the end for maybe anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes of questions. And so I'll just dive in. Sound good? Okay, so I'm going to lead with, I am 40 years old. I've been married to my wife, Allison, for 12 years. We've been together for 17. We have 2 beautiful daughters, Story and River. Story is 9 and River is 6. My oldest daughter, Story, she's beautiful. She's an angel. She's amazing, but she's got a slew of different special needs. Neurodivergent, autism, sensory issues, and she also has a genetic deletion, something called 16p11.2 genetic deletion syndrome. They could have come up with an easier name. But I lead with all of that. She is beautiful and brilliant in so many ways, and my youngest daughter, River, is a rebel rouser and just so unique, but that's my heart. Those 3 women and who I am as a psychologist, as a therapist, stems directly from who I am as a human being, who I am as a father, who I am as a husband. So I lead with that. Then I'll give you a quick intro and let you know I have my PhD from the University of West Georgia. It's a pretty unique program in consciousness and society. It has 3 different tracks: humanistic psychologies, critical psychologies, and transpersonal psychologies. 17 to 23, really rough years for me. Addiction, substance abuse, suicidality, 3 arrests, emotional turmoil, fallout with my family. I turned a corner at 24, devoted my entire life to my own holistic healing and then to carving out sacred space for young people. So I was in private practice for years, had 3 different office locations. They kept getting bigger. I kept throwing more shit in there, pardon my language, but I kept like dragging in a pool table, guitars, music stuff. I got more and more tattoos over the years. People are like, oh my God, have you always had this? You're gonna love Wes, he's a great clinician, but I gotta give you a heads up, he looks like a pirate. Over the years, I just became more and more authentic, more and more kind of wore my heart on my sleeve. It opened up a portal for young people. So I became known as the guy that you brought your kid to when they were done doing therapy. I worked with hundreds of young people that were coming out of wilderness programs, residential treatment centers, therapeutic boarding schools, intensive outpatient programs, partial hospitalization programs. Sacred work for me. These young people were beautiful, amazing, and they helped my heart heal in ways that I never imagined it could have. And so fast forward to About 6 years in private practice. I finished my PhD. Young people are coming in and I'm asking them, I'm like, if you could go anywhere you wanted and do healing work the way that you wanted to do it, what would that space look like? And we started to collaboratively build what's now Eternal Strength. So in 2020, my wife found an 8,500 square foot building. I went for it. I've grown a team of 10. We have 3 licensed clinicians, 5 therapeutic mentors, and we're a blend between a community youth center with top tier mental health therapeutic support that's customizable for every family month to month. So that's my heart, my soul. It about kicked my ass. The last 3 years have been crazy, but we've served hundreds of families. Everything we do is person-centered, humanistic, and what we call radical youth work. So that leads me to, we'll dive in, and I'm going to go through it and kind of cater some certain things. So when we talk about radical youth work, raise your hand if you've even heard that term. Nobody? Okay. So this was written on by my committee, a married couple, Dr. Hans Skott-Myhre and Dr. Kathy Skott-Myhre at the University of West Georgia and then Kennesaw State University. They've written on it for 20 plus years. If you go Google radical youth work, you're going to see extensive theoretical research. And different community-based programs have pulled from radical youth work, but as far as I'm aware, Eternal Strength, the center I run, is the only one that's really folded it in completely, and we use it as our ethos. So what's really important is we're looking at radical youth work as a way to do collaborative work with youth, to give them voice, to give them autonomy, to give them independence, and to join with them rather than to be the expert up here looking down and teaching or analyzing youth. So I want to go through these core tenets. When I think about radical youth work, and there's different ways to do it, but this is really the scaffolding, the foundational impact of radical youth work is these 4 key conceptual tenets or frameworks. So we're looking at mutual liberation, the idea of the youth worker and the youth healing together, having a mutual experience of growth and awareness together, joined together. When I say common political purpose, I'm really talking about focused attention and energy towards life-affirming, holistic growth. So a lot of people hear the word political and they think about government, big business, capitalism, economics. When I say political, it's really a community-based, can we join together and can we move towards a common purpose and a common goal of healing and uniting. And then I wanted to look at flattening the developmental hierarchy. So most of the time, raise your hand here right now if you work with youth. Okay. Raise your hand if you work with mental health and youth or you're a licensed counselor. Okay. Anybody a psychologist? Anybody else? Okay. So typically what we see in a lot of systems that work with youth is a developmental hierarchy. So we have the psychologist or the mental health clinician or the paraprofessional working from a hierarchy. And what radical youth work really seeks to do is flatten that hierarchy. How can we join with youth and really truly hear their voice and give them autonomy? And then finally, the core tenet, embracing collaborative creative life force. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean when I say creative life force. So mutual liberation, again, like I said, involves anything that we can do to carve spaces where there can be more discourse and dialogue with youth. So instead of telling youth what they need to think or feel around a particular socio-cultural or socio-political topic, how can we invite a curiosity to understand how youth are understanding their lived experience, their perception, and really invite their voice into it. And you don't see a lot of that. And so we've pushed to create this space where we can walk hand in hand with youth to really understand their experience and to invite that and be curious about it. The common political purpose, like I said, I want to read this quote because I think it's powerful, and this is from my mentor, Kathleen Skott-Myhre. She says, we have to begin by acknowledging that the kind of love we're interested in here is a political form of love. That is to say, love as a force that frees us or allows the maximum expression of our unique and idiosyncratic capacities as beings. In this sense, we are more interested in what love can do rather than what love is. For us, love as politics is the field of struggle where we fight for the capacity to become. Uniting and working together towards common political purpose. And like I said earlier, political defined as the creation of new forms of community. How can we join together and unite our voices, but also respect different voices, different opinions, and different discourse and dialogue about particular topics, whatever they may be, culturally, socio-politically. And then beginning to look at the categorization that I call a miscategorization, or a fine, hard line between youth and adult. So when we begin to look at youth and we see them as different, or we see them as not yet a full adult, I think a lot of misconceptions start to happen. You get these narratives that just become, they don't understand, they don't know enough, they're, one of my favorites that, not my favorites, but the one that just gets perpetuated more and more is the frontal lobe, executive functioning, the neocortex is not fully formed, impulse control issues, these narratives that move into language and linguistics and verbiage that change how we feel about youth. And everybody in this room has been a youth. And when we look at radical youth work, we're looking at a spirit and a soul. So I would even say that youth can be any age. It's more of a creative life force that you can embody as you move through the world. So examining how do youth and adults, if we want to categorize them like that, work together, heal together, and move in different ways, ebb and flow together. Back to flattening the developmental hierarchy, looking at challenging this traditional view of youth development as linear. And so when I begin to see youth development, I see it as more rhizomatic. And I'll talk about that, but that's an analogy to biology and ecology. So a rhizome grows in, if you think about a potato or you think about bamboo, it grows rhizomatically. It doesn't have a start or a stop. It springs off at all different portions and spaces. And so when we look at youth development, we see so much going on. And you can look through different lenses. You can look at it biologically, psychologically, socioculturally, developmentally, spiritually. But if we look at it as a straight line and it only has one goal, which is to become an adult, I feel like that does a grave disservice to youth and their voice and what they can teach us about thinking creatively, thinking critically. So working with radical youth work is this attempt to flatten that hierarchy. How can we join with youth to understand their lived experience and actually see it as valuable? You guys hanging with me? Mm-hmm. Cool. You can yell out if you oppose anything. You can be like, that's bullshit. And then I'll kind of want to move through some, and then I'll pull back and maybe invite some questions and we can dive in. Co-collaborative creative life force expression. So you guys, I don't know necessarily who I would be without the youth that I worked with. And so in my private practice, the youngest I'd see was about 8, 9, 10, and oldest was probably late 20s. Anxiety, depression, substance abuse, suicidality, self-harm, a slew of different DSM diagnoses that were given out formally, not by me, and I could talk about the DSM at length. If you guys aren't already familiar with the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that's kind of the Bible for different disorders. Young people with thought disorders, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, mood disorders, borderline personality disorder, young people with a slew of different neurodivergent disorders, nonverbal learning disorder, autism. I always saw their heart, and I still do. And so and I'll get emotional thinking about it, but it was really, really important for me to give youth voice. And that's what was happening in my private practice. Is I was truly curious. I'd want to know, okay, who are you? Has anybody in here ever seen the Pixar movie Soul? It's that, man. This shit was fire, pardon my language, but it was just like right to the heart of who are you? How do you make meaning from your life? What is your narrative about yourself? These deeper questions that we oftentimes don't see youth having a sacred space to explore. They're being told who they are, being told what they're feeling, whether it's right or wrong, instead of a massive respect and reverence and curiosity for, I want to understand you. I want to understand your phenomenological lived experience that only you house, and I'm here for it. I'm open and I'm providing that sacred space. Everything we do at the center that we have music, we have arts, we have a ceramics room, we do large group gatherings. It's all co-led, and it is this creative life force expression. So we have a team of artists and healers that bring their interest in arts and work with these young people, and we heal together. And that's what I call that co-collaborative creative life force expression. So I'm going to dive in. Any questions before I keep rambling? None? What? I'm just joking. I don't know what questions you would have yet. But I promise when I get to the end, you'll have some. So, humanistic psychology. Raise your hand if you have any awareness of the history of that. So some. Awesome. You guys want to shout out any figures? They're up there. You can do that. Carl Rogers is really the one that gets a ton of the credit, as he should. And so he was the front runner of person-centered or humanistic counseling and psychological work, which was a third force psychology that arrived as a direct result to challenging a lot of psychoanalysis. So Freudian psychoanalysis, Jacques Lacanian psychoanalysis, Jungian psychoanalysis, the idea that there's an expert of the human psyche helping you explore your unconscious. Carl Rogers came in and said, I believe that my client is the expert, and I believe that they have information, and if I can just do a couple things, if I can carve sacred space, if I can have my authentic self, not as a clinical professional or a psychologist, but my true authentic self enter the room, and if I can have unconditional positive regard, be able to have empathy and deep attunement for this person and their lived experience. Can I really join in them and carve that? So we pull a lot. How we do radical youth work at Eternal Strength is we pull a tremendous amount. All of our counseling and psychotherapy has a foundational, humanistic, person-centered, and relational trajectory that we pull from. So then we get to just some of these basic beliefs that, I think when you read them, it's very easy to brush past the heart and soul of what they represent. So I can read through them and just be like, humans have free will, all individuals are unique and have an innate inborn drive to achieve their maximum potential, self-actualization, self-transcendence. Psychology should study the individual. The goal of psychology is to formulate a complete description of what it means to be a human being holistically. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you guys a video that I think is a better representation than just the words on the screen. And I don't know if I'll show the entire video. I'm so scared to minimize that and not get back to it. All right, you guys ready? Yeah?
Literally at this second, like in everything that's happening in the world.
Volume good?
Being a human is pretty much the hardest thing to be.
What do you mean to be the people nowadays think that they have all these boxes that they have to check to be successful. But to who?
All we do is hide away. All we do is hide away. All we do is chase the day. All we do is chase the day.
It's really hard to give advice to people because I'm not perfect yet.
All we do is lie and wait. All we do is lie and wait. All we do is feel the fate. All we do is feel the fate. I've been upside down. I don't wanna be the right way round. Can't find paradise on the ground.
Uplifting somebody. That's what the human life is supposed to be about. Uplifting somebody.
I've been upside down. I don't wanna be the right way round. Can't find paradise on the ground.
You have to surrender and accept where you are. Because when you accept where you are, then it's a lot easier to move forward.
I think that success is making the most number of people's lives better, and I think that's why we chase it. Because we feel a sense of purpose when we make other people's lives better.
I think in the last 8 years I became more human. Now there's this life around me that it really matters how I need to live, morally and ethically and spiritually. I need to be more reflective on things that I do because I want to pass that on to Max, to my son. And I think to be human is to know that we're not alone in something.
You can't just punch through the darkness and be like, all right, I'm going to be successful. No, you gotta have something to say.
I think that is the point of life, is to say, okay, I have this one life to live. What do I want to do with it? What meaning do I ascribe to?
That's the thing about being human. So the capability potential is huge, and being human, how one also you have to channel it in a way that serves other people, serves the total nature and everything. That's it.
Hay muchos tropiezos en una vida que creemos que va a ser lo mejor de la vida, pero hay que pasarlo.
You know, Gandhi had this quote, be the change you want to see in the world. I fully embrace that as my identity. Because we can all talk about things changing and looking a certain way. But if you yourself don't subscribe to it, what is that?
All we do is hide away. All we do is hide away. All we do is chase the day. All we do is chase the day. All we do is play it safe. All we do is live inside a cage. All we do is play it safe. All we do. I've been upside down. I don't wanna be the right way round. I'll find paradise on the ground. I've been upside down. I don't wanna be the right way round. I'll find paradise on the ground.
You're never out of the game until you're actually dead. You know what I'm saying? Like, as long as you got breath in your lungs, and as long as you're breathing, as long as you're still moving, as long as you're actually breathing, you always have a second chance. You always have a chance. There's no such thing as no second chances. You know, life doesn't be like, oh, well, you failed. You know what I'm saying? Life doesn't be like, yo, you failed, so you know what? That's it for you.
It's not a title on you, you gay, you straight. Oh, that don't mean nothing, man. That don't mean nothing. regular human being. That's what it's about. I got a son that crossed over. He's a woman now. I support him with all my heart because he's a good kid. That's all that should matter at the end of the day. Like I told my son, my daughter now, you was more man than I will ever be because you came right out and wanted to be who you wanted to be.
On peut construire de nouvelles choses, on peut construire un nouveau futur. Et nous avons cette capacité, donc on doit croire en nous-mêmes et en nous.
Do something for somebody you don't know. That's what life's about. What else is there? Serious, what else is there?
Once everybody starts looking at one another as, as a brother or sister, a human being, beauty will spread like wildfire.
You can't live life by yourself. You need to just give in and say, you're here too.
Find yourself, lose yourself, and then find others. I think that is how to be a human.
All we do is hide away. All we do is hide away. All we do is chase the day. All we do is chase the day. All I did was fail today. All I wanna be is whites and waves. All I did was fail today. All we do.
What do you guys think? Solid? I know it's a little bit long, but I think that pulls me back to when we say humanistic, that you can feel it there. It's I think it goes beyond language. I think it goes beyond words. I think it's something that's a felt sense and it's intuitive. And we know it when we're around it. When you're around somebody that you feel like there's space enough for you to be yourself, and it's warm and it's accepting, you can feel that. And then you can feel when you're around people where that's not allowed, or they haven't accepted pieces and portions of themselves, so there's no room for them nor you. And so when we pull into this youth work with these kids, youth, adolescents, young adults, however we want to phrase it, it's a human soul and it's sacred. And I think giving voice to that is incredibly important. So all of our work is from that space, that self-actualization, creativity, health, individuality, and then a looking at and a curiosity again, not of I need to make you do this behaviorally, because you see that quite a bit with youth. And it makes sense, we get really scared. So when there's patterns and behaviors like drug use, addiction, self-harm, suicidality, I think the gut instinct is to preserve and take care of and try and help these behaviors shift. But I don't know if anybody in this room has ever tried to change a kid's behavior. How's that go? Yeah, I don't mean to sound like an asshole, but it's like, it's almost like it becomes counterproductive. There has to be this beauty in this space that you arrive at where you let go of whether that youth will decide to do something behaviorally, and you still have this unconditional love. You still have this acceptance. You still have a space energetically that you arrive at where you say, I'm going to love you and I'm going to be here and I'm going to hold sacred space no matter where you're at on your journey. I think it's very hard, but it's very important. And I know when you're a youth and you feel that, it can have a massive impact. I'll tell you guys a quick story. I can remember, so I play guitar and I look like I could fool everybody in the room that I'm like the most amazing guitarist ever, but I just know this one scale and I can play it really good. And I had this awesome guitar teacher around like 13, 14, 15. And it was Guitar Center. They were doing an opening and I was 15 years old and it was a grand opening, and I went with my dad. And we go up to this Guitar Center over by Cumberland Mall, Galleria area, and we come in and we're like, there's like hundreds of people in the store. It's the first day they've opened, and they come over the loudspeaker and they're like, in 3 minutes, there's going to be a guitar competition, And you can sign up, and whoever wins, you'll get 1 minute to play your best solo, and whoever wins gets 2 tickets to Joe Satriani at the Roxy Theater tonight. And I was like, oh my God. And like these Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, they're like the noodler guys that if you don't play guitar, you're probably like, okay, turn this off now. But if you play guitar, it's like they're God. So I love Joe Satriani. My dad looks at me and he's like, Wes, you got, and I'm like, no. I had a ponytail. I was super chubby. I was really anxious. I was very shy, and I was like, there's no way. No, I can't, Dad. I can't do it. And I saw him kick into gear. He was about to be like, you have to. You're going to regret it so much if you don't. And then he stopped himself, and he said, look, I think you should do it. I think you'll probably be bummed if you don't. But I'm going to be cool no matter what you decide to do. I'm going to go over here and look at the drums. And he left me. And I was like, I think I'm going to go do it. And I signed up. My point is, if my dad would have stayed 5 seconds longer and said one more word, there's no way. I would have just fought that energy of him trying to get me to do it with some type of resistance. And so I think with young people, I think about that a lot. It's the people who can show up in their lives and say, I think you'll feel better or would have a different experience if you move in this direction. But I love and I care for you deeply, and whether you choose to or not, you have ultimate free will. There's a beauty that happens there. So as we move through, I want to talk a little bit about a couple other theorists, and I don't want to get too heady and academic. That's what a PhD will do to you. And then I started, while I was working on the PhD, I'd be talking to clients, and they'd be like, what the fuck did you just say, man? And I'd be like, sorry, dude. Phenomenology, ontology, epistemology, all these things that nobody should ever be intimidated by language, by the way. You know what I mean? I felt it at first. I was like, I'm not cut out for this program. I don't understand any of this. It's just time and repetition, and it's playing with language. But there's a couple people that are really rogue, unique psychologists and philosophers that impacted and influenced radical youth work, and in particular the way that we do it. So has anybody in here ever heard of Gregory Bateson? Okay, awesome, rock and roll. He's very, very unique. You could call him any one of the different disciplinary fields. So you could call him a psychologist, an anthropologist, an ecologist, a philosopher. He was a front runner in the cyberneticist arena and cybernetics. But at the heart of everything, he was a social scientist, and he was fascinated with patterns and the web of relationality that connected everything. So he wrote a lot on ecologies of the mind, looking at the mind and looking at how we think cognitively as its own ecological system, as its own ecosystem. And rather than doing the analogy that we commonly get, which is computers, you know, people are computers, I like to do an analogy that I see as more as plant matter and more as an ecological system and more as growing and moving organically in different ways. So he was really focused on what is this web of relationality, what are the patterns that connect, and anything that he would look at, he would try and understand, not necessarily trying to define it, but trying to understand and watch patterns and flows. So he did a lot of family therapy work, he did a lot of family systems work, and rather than coming in and trying to diagnose, he would look at what are the patterns of rigidity that have been formed in this family and what are the roles that they are playing in different ways to try and understand. Looking at the complex nature rather than just trying to simplify it, looking at a total set of relationships. He's got a beautiful documentary. His daughter, Nora Bateson, wrote an incredible book called Small Arcs of Little Circles. And she's amazing. And in the documentary, she's growing up and her dad's teaching her. They're going on hikes and looking at nature and ecology and the human mind and psychology. And that's something that I've always been fascinated by because I come from a lineage. So my mom has her master's in behavioral analysis. She runs an advocacy center that works with abused and neglected children out in Cobb County called Safe Path. And then her mom, my grandmother, has her EDD in psychology and taught at Charleston Southern University for years. So it was only fitting that I carry the torch of these strong maternal women in my bloodline. But I love watching Gregory Bateson and his daughter Nora. So Gregory Bateson says a couple things. The major problems in the world are the result of the difference between how nature works and the way that people think. The only way out is spiritual, intellectual, and emotional revolution, in which finally we learn to experience firsthand the interloping connections between person and person, organism and organism, action and consequence. I love that one. The only way out is our spiritual, intellectual, and emotional revolution. It reminds me of Cornel West. You guys ever watch him? Oh, he's great, man. When he speaks, one of the things he stands up and he goes, he was talking about life at this humanities talk, and he said, nobody gets out alive. It's from the wound to the tomb. That's a short thing. Yeah, he's brilliant. Nora Bateson. So these are important theoretical concepts that have been studied and researched for years in different ways that we are pulling from and weaving into the praxis of youth work and the way that we do it with radical youth work. Nora Bateson began to look at another ecological analogy, which was when you get into farming, and they call it monocropping. So the idea that you are compartmentalizing and only growing particular things, and you're refusing to cross-pollinate. Basically, Nora Bateson said that's what we're doing psychologically. That's what we're doing in our university systems. We are severing off and closing doors and not cross-pollinating. Anthropology is not talking to sociology, that's not talking to psychology, to biology, to neuroscience. We're not doing what Nora Bateson likes to call trans-contextual work. It's beyond multidisciplinary. It moves into a true weaving and understanding of how we look at something. And so Gregory and Nora Bateson were big proponents of getting rid of these labels and looking at the patterns that connect. So when we begin to look at something, yes, we can look at through certain lenses, but we should see the way that the lenses impact one another. And a good example would be, you can take something like addiction. You could begin to look at addiction as one of 5 things, either biological, psychological, socio-cultural, developmental, or spiritual. And right now, if you go read something on addiction or watch something on addiction, you're going to get a hierarchy that gets created. And somebody's going to say it's primarily this. It's primarily biological and neurological and has to do with genetics and genetic expression and epigenetics. Somebody else is going to say, no, it's primarily trauma and what that does and a response to trauma. Somebody else will come in like Bruce Alexander and his work, Globalization of Addiction. He'll say, no, it's socio-cultural. It's what we've done to people. It's psychosocial disintegration. The idea for Gregory and Nora Bateson was, we got to stop this chaos of somebody coming in and trying to name this is what it is, and instead watch it. Watch how it ebbs and it flows and what it does. So more important than defining it, watching how it moves, watching how it expresses itself. Okay, I'm going to move through this one quickly. Has anybody in this room heard of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari? Okay, awesome. Once again, somebody in the front, rock and roll. You guys, so the first time I read these guys, it was very, very difficult. It was almost like trying to decode something. They are both French philosophers. One is a psychoanalyst and the other is primarily a philosopher. Gilles Deleuze is primarily a philosopher, and Félix Guattari is a psychoanalyst that did some beautiful work in the 70s. They have built a toolkit of language that oftentimes primarily in the field of education it's been utilized, but it's being used in different fields as well. So there's certain terms that they use that are these beautiful ways to track and understand particular things. When I talk about rhizome, again, it's an analogy that's looking at things that grow rhizomatically rather than things that grow in a linear fashion. So like a tree would be arborescent, tree-like, it grows almost in a hierarchy. It has a pattern you can track and follow. Things that grow rhizomatically are very, very hard to track. They're spontaneous, they spring forth, they loop back on themselves. If you look at ginger, the root plant, and how it grows, when you watch it in the soil, and if you guys just Google rhizome or rhizomatic, you can see it's just springing forth and looping in on itself and tracking. So Gil, Deleuze, and Felix Guattari were trying to understand ways that how we think rhizomatically could be beneficial and how we do work rhizomatically. I'm going to do a quick breakdown and I'm going to kind of run through these things. But this is something that when I talk about the center that we run, and I really want to get super heady and academic, I bring out this, and it's retina. So it's the idea of the eye, the retina, light, the light source and how it hits your eye. And what I've done is break down how we do youth work. We are rhizomatic, we are experiential, we are therapeutic, and then we have these fields of becoming imperceptible, becoming nomadic, and we are an assemblage. So I'm going to run through this quickly. At Eternal Strength, we seek to make maps and not tracings. To be rhizomorphous is to produce stems and filaments that seem to be roots, or better yet, connect them with penetrating the trunk, but put them to strange new uses. Nothing is beautiful or loving or political aside from underground stems and aerial roots, growths and rhizomes. I know it sounds maybe difficult to wrap your head around, but it's a beautiful philosophy and framework that can be used to understand how things move in a non-linear fashion. Experiential. So we have 5 therapeutic mentors at our center, and they do what's called experiential work. When you walk into our center, a young person gets paired with a mentor and they can decide how they want to spend time. So we have a huge music studio, we have a ceramics room, we have a skate ramp, we have all of these different experiential engagement activities. And we're really trying to get to the heart and soul of what do you care about and what do you want to do and how can we engage in that as a project that can move you towards your therapeutic healing. Does that make sense to everybody? Imperceptible. So this idea of becoming, we are always becoming. There's never a stagnant self. We can trick ourselves into thinking that this is who I am, this is how I put my pants on in the morning, this is I'm Wes, I'm a 40-year-old Caucasian male therapist, all the structures of the ego and identity. But there's so much more. There's so much more to who we are, how we're growing, how we are being influenced and impacted by others, by our environment, by what we consume. So this idea of becoming imperceptible is to not stay stagnant. It's the best way to think about it. To not overly define yourself that could sever or prevent potentiality for who you can become and are always becoming. Becoming nomadic. So this is when we look at space and when we think about how nomads move through space. This is how we use our center. So we literally, I write, we move, explore, experience, and flow through space together on a journey of exploration and freedom. The center is our territory to traverse through, not a stagnant space to occupy our own. We are all nomads on a journey of growth, and Eternal Strength is our watering hole, meeting place, tribal community clubhouse that carves lines of connection on our soul's path to expansion and growth. So you guys, when we built this spot, I had these kids come in and I said, what do you want this room to be? What do you want to do here? We let their voice shine in how we move through the space, how we utilize the space, and really encourage them to bring their true voice to everything that they do at the center. Finally, the assemblage. We're looking at, when you talk about an assembly, a gathering, a community, a connection, what are our goals? And that is love, trust, connection, and expression. Every single young person that comes in the center, finding their true heart, finding their true voice, letting them see their beauty, and having a sacred space to be able to express that. Okay, we're at 1:45. How's everybody hanging? Good? Okay. Has anybody heard of R.D.Laing? Okay. He was very, very, very controversial. 60s and 70s. And this is my last theorist, and then we'll dive into some cool stuff. You guys are like, oh my God. With the theory, man. He's got a beautiful film called Mad to Be Normal. If you guys ever get a chance, watch that. It's a great representation of his life and his life's work. So he came along in the 60s and the 70s counterculture, and he started what's called, he was one of the figures that started the anti-psychiatry movement. Now, when you hear that initially, I know it hits in a certain way where it's like, what, anti-psychiatry, against all medication, against everything? No, against anything that dehumanizes, against any part of psychology and psychiatry that is abusive, oppressive, and dehumanizes individuals and takes away their voice of agency. So he fought for people's rights. He fought to get people out of asylums. He fought to get people out of abusive psychiatric institutions. And he did a tremendous amount of work with Franco Basaglia, an Italian psychologist who did some wild stuff, you guys. At one point, Franco Basaglia gathered with all these artists, this was in the 60s and 70s, and he brought them into the asylums where they were doing severely abusive things to people that were suffering with mental health issues and mental illness. And he had all of the patients take chains and crowbars and go around the center and basically destroy anything that had ever hurt or harmed them. And then they all the artists from the community turned it into art. It was this beautiful, man. Franco Basaglia's work, R.D.Laing's work, Thomas Saz's work, but all of them having a critical eye in looking at psychology and psychiatry, wanting to not just blindly accept everything as truth, but to challenge and understand more about these fields, why they diagnose, the way that that's formulated, the way that that moves, the politics that are involved. So the beautiful work that they do. And this opens the arena for the work that we do with young people, where if a young person has a bipolar diagnosis, has a dissociative identity disorder diagnosis, has an autism diagnosis, has any type of formal diagnoses, the work we try and do is, what does that mean to you? We sit with that young person, we go, what are you telling yourself about yourself? So we're back to the most powerful force in the human psyche is how you describe yourself to yourself. And what happens to countless kids that go into psychiatric institutions and get a diagnosis and then are just left alone with it? That's what I worked with for years. 16, 17-year-olds being like, man, I'm bipolar now. As if that's their entire identity and everything else completely got wiped away. At a time where young people from 10 to 25 are formulating identity, trying to understand who they are in the world, identity is incredibly important. And what the psychiatric and psychological institutions do is they don't do further work in trying to help these young people understand, what does that even mean? Let me sit with you and let's go through this assessment to show you aspects of self and what's shown up and help you understand it and framework it. A type of psychological formulation, if that makes sense. So really, R.D.Laing and the anti-psychiatry movement was a lot of pulling from that. My last theorist, last one, I promise. Rosie Braidotti, she is brilliant, her writing is brilliant, and she has a concept called nomadic subjectivity. Really, really beautiful. And so looking at this, the importance of fluidity, diversity, and multiplicity in the construction of identity. A lot of narrative work. What is the story you tell yourself about yourself? Nomadic subjectivity emphasizes ways in which individuals are constantly in motion, interacting with, and adapting to their social and cultural context. And you guys, we see this rampant with youth. Youth are seeking tribal community, connection, acceptance, love, appreciation, but we see it formulate in pretty interesting ways. And so on a lot of the social media, Instagram, TikTok, there's these subcultures that have formed where young people are going, that's me. That's absolutely me. So I'm going to identify with this group. And I'm all for that. I just think it's important to pull back and help young people see what is driving this craving to identify and to define oneself, and to make sure that they are moving towards holistic growth and health and potentiality, and not closing any doors on who they are in that identity development. Okay, this is our crew. So over here, a couple people are missing from this, but if I kind of go around, I'll show you guys. This is Ty, our creative director, and he's a mentor. Andrew, who's above him. The blonde girl beside him is Kara, our clinical director. This is Ashley, one of our therapists. My wife has the purple hair, yours truly. Mike is a mentor, Abby is a mentor, and that's our office manager, Brandy. And you guys, this team of people, I'll be super candid with you guys. I was happy as a pig in shit in private practice. I was like, this is awesome. I got a 1,500 square foot space. I got a pool table. I got all my guitars in here. I'm seeing 8 clients a day. My soul is being fed. I'm doing this beautiful work. I get to teach at university. I get to write. I'm finishing my PhD. I'll just write some books. I'll go present. I'll speak. You guys, the families, the young people just kept coming. And I'll get emotional, man, but like, I didn't have anywhere to send them. And so I was like, yo, okay. At first, you know, I was like, oh, this is great. I'm the best counselor in the world. Yeah, I'm incredible. And then it was like, oh, dear God, can we please have some creative, unique, humanistic youth workers in different ways? And these young people that I worked with just kept getting funneled in this system. So they show up, suicidality, self-harm, anxiety, depression, grief, all types of diagnoses, and then they'd end up getting into this system. And there was a bigger system that was involved with the affluent families in particular, where it was an educational consultant, and I knew all of them, and they would refer to these wilderness programs. I'm sure some of you guys know about the wilderness programs. We could spend all afternoon diving into that. The bottom line, there are some good people, there are some good clinicians, there are some good programs, but like any other field, there are some unethical programs, there are some burnt out people, and there are kids getting funneled into wilderness programs where it's doing more harm than good. And a lot of that has to do with getting gooned against their will. And so I was watching these ed consultants refer to wilderness programs, then refer to residential treatment centers, to therapeutic boarding schools, and then the young person would come back home. And they would do well in certain environments, but they come back home and they still struggle intensely. And they end up in an intensive outpatient program, IOP, or a PHP, partial hospitalization program. I know all of them in Georgia. But I kept asking my clients, because they've been through everything. And I was like, that's back to kind of my story. I was like, okay, what would it look like if you could go, you know, you've been to all these programs, you've seen all these youth workers, you've seen all these professionals. If there a place existed, what would it look like? And that's what built Eternal Strength. So this is our breakdown. This is how we do radical youth work. We consider it our 3-tier approach. So again, radical youth work has its own history, but we're pulling in and doing it in a unique way. So the first is everything that I went through, I'm kind of pulling back from, but this community involvement, mutual collaboration, mutual liberation, all of our community events are entirely free. Parents, families, young people. The next one we're doing is 331. It's called Magic Music Rooms. We're gonna have all these music performances. They're these beautiful gatherings, and we're over in Alpharetta, Georgia, just so you guys know. That was like a shameless plug, right? Alpharetta, Georgia, 331, be there, be square. But we're really allowing youth to lead this. This isn't like we're going, okay, our next event is gonna be this. They are coming to us in their collaborative work with us and saying, can we put on an art show? And we're like, when do you wanna set the date? What do you need from us? How can we help you prep for it? So we do an annual art show. We're doing some theater performances. A ton of young people are performing music. We're just giving them as much voice as we can. And you guys, they're wanting to do crazy stuff, man. We're doing all types of mental health therapy and counseling, and they're like, yo, can I have my birthday here? When's the last time you saw a young person be like, hey, can I have my birthday at my therapist's office? You know what I mean? And my heart's just like bursting. You guys, I've worked harder than I've ever worked in my entire life. I poured every financial resource I had into this. We are working, so we're private pay, we're not on insurance, everything is a la carte, everything is customizable, but we are scholarshiping families that can't afford because we have a nonprofit 501c3 leg called Cosmic Lamb. Last year, we scholarshiped $93,000 in therapeutic services to families and youth that couldn't afford anything. And we're doing all the community youth work. So we're having these, again, it's a blend between this community youth center with this customizable care. I plan to grow us, I plan to expand on acreage, I plan to build a small alternative wilderness, an alternative residential. This is my life's mission, I'm pouring everything into it, but these kids, it's all for them. And I'm like, damn y'all, man, if you guys would have just shut up, I could have just chilled and became an old, wise old sage psychologist stroking my beard. But like, they need it, you guys, and they're coming to us in droves. Is that the right way to say it? In droves? But and they have voice and they're connecting, and we can offer containment and care and support, and their art and their expressive forms, it's like they're coming alive. And that's what we believe. We believe that through meaning, purpose, and true community connection, we start to see healing in all of these pathological arenas. So this is kind of some of what we do, but we do a lot of in-house stuff. So we have these zines up here and everything up on the counter. We got a couple wristbands, guitar picks, posters, our little manifesto. You guys can pick up any of that. It's all free. But this is our crew. And then this is some of the young people. So I'm starting a channel where I'm actually sitting with them and asking them questions instead of us as a staff defining what is radical youth work, what is mental health. We're trying to give them voice and them empowerment to be able to share what they're thinking and what they're feeling. So this is a young guy by the name of Sloth. He's awesome. I've known him for years. Let me see if I can get this to play.
Somebody in a lab, so you're trying to treat them that way, and you like put them under a microscope or something. It's not going to be extraordinarily helpful. But I think mental health is just God, I'm trying to find a way to say it that isn't like an essay.
I know. Well, it's an exhaustive question.
Yeah.
It's a broad question.
It's really important. I think it's a very nuanced thing. I think mental health is everything. I'm trying to be as vague as possible, but I think that's the way I put it.
So, and we're growing in how we're doing that. And again, it's not soliciting them to do it, it's they're literally asking. So they see our Instagram, they see what we're putting up there, and they're like, hey, we have a small podcast room at the center. And so many young people have been like, hey, can I jump on the podcast and talk about my suicide attempt? Can I talk about what I went through with depression? Can I talk about my time in different types of therapy? And then a lot of those young people have said, I'm ready. I'm ready to tell my story, and I'm ready for you guys to put it on your social media in case it'll help somebody else. And then we've had a bunch of kids that are like, oh, hell no. There's no way, dude, I'm telling that. But we can still go in the podcast room. We can still do a mock interview. We can still record it, and they can take it home and hold on to it. And they can have it for their own reflection or show it to their friends. So let me back up. This is Emily, who's here in our screen printing room, our ceramic studio, everything experiential. And if we don't have it, we'll build it. We had a young guy come in, he was like, yo, do you guys have a forge? I want to build a sword. And we were like, well, we don't, but we can go to Home Depot. And he was like, yeah, let's look up how to build a forge. So him and one of the mentors built a forge in the backyard, and they were making a sword. I was like, please don't stab anybody with the sword. And then, this is another young girl, Jade, who I've known for years, and we were talking about in her interview, what do you ever see your true self? And this one is, the volume on this isn't great, so you have to be quiet. Like you guys are not being quiet. Quiet down, please.
Or when There are certain outfits I put on that felt like they really made me outfits that are me. And art sometimes, illustrations, I feel like myself. But that's hard too, because a lot of times with art, especially when you like something that's kind of popular or kind of, it's hard to not feel like what you're making is being done for or that you have to make it. So there have been a few times when I feel like I'm sitting actually talking to people, and they're usually small sketches, or fast sketches, not necessarily small.
And then I get to, so again, this is our work, the community involvement, our experiential, and finally our counseling and psychotherapy that I talked about that just pulls from the heart of humanistic, person-centered counseling and psychotherapy. We have a few clinicians on staff that are trained in brain spotting, a unique trauma methodology that's a sister to EMDR, for anybody who's heard about that, eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing disorder. Anytime I say those big words, I think about that movie with Jim Carrey, Me, Myself, and Irene. Did you guys anybody see that? There's one point where he's taking this medication, and she's like, "What's that for?" And he's like, "Oh, just this little thing." And she's like, "What's it called?" And he's like, "Advanced delusionary schizophrenia with involuntary narcissistic rage." And she's like, "Oh my God." So you guys, a couple more things, and those are my references, but I'd love to, how are we on time? What time is it?
14 minutes.
Awesome. A couple other things. If you guys are on Instagram, our Instagram is Eternal Strength ATL. Here we just had a custom mask made, and this is my daughter River with the custom mask. It's very non-climactic. She just scared my wife in the kitchen. But we do a ton of different interviews. We have an incredible community support of parents, of families, of donors helping us. A couple clips I just want to show you guys that I think were brilliant.
What do you think you've learned from children all these years?
Boy, you shoot the biggest fish. The most important.
I know, it's like, what's the meaning of life?
That's right. That it's all right to be yourself. And that there are those in this life who will accept you exactly as you are.
Come on, Mr. Rogers, man. Yo. And then he did another one. He's just dropping
What do you think is the biggest
fire.
mistakes parents make in raising their children?
Not to remember their own childhood. I think that the best thing that we can do is to think about what it was like for us and know what our children are going through.
But you know when it's so hard once you get to be a parent, you always say, I will never do this. When your mother's doing it to you or your father's doing it to you, you say, I will never do this to my child. And then you get to our age and you forget what it was like to be this child. You really do forget.
But those children can help re-evoke what it was like. And that's why when you're a parent, you have a new chance to grow.
What do you think is the biggest mistakes parents make in raising?
Amazing though, right? So you guys, and then I have a news, we had the whole team drawn into cartoons by this dad who does stuff for Marvel Comics. And he was like, you guys want me to draw you into cartoons? And I was like, duh. So there's me. And then I'll just show you my crew.
This is Monday morning message
Mental Health Monday, maniacally managing minions.
Meticulously monitoring
Marmaduke. Ma'am, do you have anything to say about Monday? We've got New Year. Let's go. Story. Anything about Monday? Can I see your sticker story? Nice.
So, you guys, I'm honored. I'm very, very grateful. This is my life's work. I figure I can just open it up to questions if anybody has anything, but please come take as much of this material as you can, and I'm just grateful to have this time. Thank you all.